The Churches of Christ present Speaking the Truth in Love, a program bringing you life's answers from the Word of God.
Hello, this is Seth Parnell, the minister of the Portia Church of Christ, and we are glad that you have joined us. This program is brought to you by the area Churches of Christ, who are listed at the end of this program. Please visit or contact them if you have a Bible question. We appreciate you being here. We hope that you have a wonderful day today. We're going to be in Genesis 32 for this lesson. Genesis 32. And so going to specifically verses 22 through 32 is what we're going to take a look at today. We are oftentimes, we are a world that values competition. We value events that have, either two individuals or two teams, competing against one another in order to either win a game or to win, some sort of prize. Oftentimes you'll see, large crowds, gather together to cheer on their team or to cheer on their individual, and because we find it entertaining, to watch, competition a lot of times, and it can cause, drama, it can cause, controversy, it can cause excitement, from the fans. Whenever a team, makes a big play, what do the fans do? If they're cheering for that team, they start yelling, they start cheering, and they're really happy that their team has done something that is good. And so it can be a lot of fun. But sometimes a competition can be a serious matter, something that's more than just a game. And in Genesis chapter 32, we kind of find one of those such things. A man by the name of Jacob finds himself in a wrestling match of sorts, with an unknown individual that he has never met before. But when Jacob was someone who was quite determined in what he did, and he was committed in order to win. Jacob, of course, was would be the part of that those early patriarchs. We got Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob had a brother by the name of Esau, and his father, Isaac as well. And so he finds himself in this conflict with this unknown stranger, one that he could not prevail against. He would try his best. He would be someone who did his utmost in order to try to gain victory over this individual and kind of this strange situation where he finds himself in. But yet, he could not, prevail, against it. If you look at, the kind of the verses surrounding our section for this lesson, you see that, Jacob was preparing for a long-awaited reunion with his brother. His brother Esau was he's going to get to see Esau for the first time in a very long time. And reunions are often, very good things, very positive things. Sometimes you may have a class reunion, or you may have a family reunion, and where you get together and you get to visit and catch up with people that you haven't seen in a long time. Oftentimes people will sometimes travel a great distance in order to see a friend they haven't seen for a while, or to be reunited with a person that's close to them. It's something that we value pretty highly. But this particular reunion, where Jacob was going to see his brother for the first time in a long time, caused him a lot of anxiety, caused him a lot of fear, because they had not parted on very good terms. But the last time that Jacob saw Esau, Esau's words was, "I'm going to wait until my father is until he has been mourned over, and then I'm going to kill my brother. I'm going to kill Jacob." Jacob was kind of known for his deceptive practice. He was whisked away to his relative Laban in order to escape the wrath of Esau, to escape his anger and wanting to kill him. Jacob was, if you remember the story, Jacob would deceive his brother, or kind of take advantage of his brother and to take his birthright from him. He would feed him some food in exchange for his birthright, and he would deceive his father into getting a blessing that was intended for Esau. He would be put hair on his arms, and he would kind of pretend or act like he was Esau in order to receive the blessing of his father. And of course, that made Esau very angry. As we said, made him full of wrath. And as we said before, he was willing to kill Jacob in that instance. And so, in response to this, Jacob was afraid, and you might understand why. He was afraid of what might happen when he sees his brother again. Would his brother, would he still be angry? Would he still hold that grudge? Would he be ready to take vengeance on Jacob the first time that he saw him? Or would he have forgotten about it by now? He didn't know. But he sends his family across the river and to prepare for this, but he himself remains on the other side of the river. And this is where he has this encounter with this man, with this strange individual that he gets into this wrestling match with. And that brings us to Genesis chapter 32, where we're going to read our verses for this lesson and see what takes place during this kind of dramatic scene that we read about in Genesis chapter 32. And so starting in verse 22, it says, "The same night he got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maids, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. And he took them and sent them across the stream, and likewise everything that he had. And Jacob was left alone. And a man wrestled with him until daybreak. And when the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he struck him on the hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint, and he wrestled with him. Then he said, 'Let me go, for the day is breaking.' But Jacob said, 'I will not let you go, unless you bless me.' So he said to him, 'What is your name?' And he said, 'Jacob.' Then the man said, 'You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans, and have prevailed.' Then Jacob asked him, 'Please tell me your name.' But he said, 'Why is it that you ask my name?' And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, 'For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life is preserved.' The sun rose upon him as he passed Penuel, limping because of his hip. Therefore to this day the Israelites do not eat the thigh muscle that is on the hip socket, because he struck Jacob on the hip and at the thigh muscle." And so we have this case in which Jacob is he sent his entire family over onto the to the other side of the river, and he remains by himself, kind of in solitude, over on the other side, where he meets this man, and he wrestles this man in the night. Like I said, they would go back and forth. Neither one could get the upper hand. Neither one could really dominate the other. And so you think of an exciting sports game where the teams are going back and forth, and no one can really get ahead for too long. That's kind of the scene that we have here in Genesis 32. Jacob is wrestling with this individual, and no one could prevail over the other. And sometimes we may kind of get the sense that this lasted all night long. We know that Jacob had to take his family across the river first, and which would take a pretty significant amount of time. Back then, with the modes of transportation, that they had, crossing a river was a big deal. It was a serious concern for them, and so it would take quite a bit of time to take all the children, to take all the supplies, all the animals, all the people, and get them safely across the river. And so this would take a bit of time. And so this match would take place with the rest of the time that was left until daybreak. As this individual will say, the day is breaking, let me go. And so eventually, the sun is rising, and the dawn is breaking, is fixing to be daylight. And this individual, he touches the hip of Jacob, and he puts it out of socket, which is something that was no doubt quite painful for him to experience. If you're ever someone who has broken something or dislocated something, the pain that can cause. And no doubt Jacob was in some excruciating pain in this case. But yet it says that Jacob still, he wouldn't let him go. He still had the determination and had the endurance and the toughness in order to keep hold of this person, even when his hip was not working. He was very, very determined. Sometimes we ask ourselves, the question, how tightly do we hold upon our faith? How tightly do we hold upon those things that we hold dear? Sometimes as a Christian, you may go through some tough times. You may go through some trials that are thrown your way. You may have to experience maybe some mistreatment, or you may be someone who goes through unfortunate events. Bad things sometimes happen to us as people. That is part of life. And sometimes we go through those things. But if we're not careful, sometimes we can let the circumstances of this world separate us from our faith in God, and kind of remove us from being faithful to the one who provides us life. And that can be a situation that is most unfortunate. We can't let the happenings of this world, the suffering of this world, be something that pulls us away from God, because God is someone who offers us something that this world simply cannot. He offers us hope. He offers us peace. He offers us salvation. And so how tightly do we hold on to our faith, that we hold on to our looking to Jesus? If we're someone who lets anything and everything separate us from Him, we'll be, as the Scriptures describe, someone who is tossed here and there, or to and fro, never being able to settle down and to do something that is that is worthwhile. But we need to hold on, no matter what happens to us, no matter what life throws at you. You need to hold on to your faith. Hold on to Jesus, because He can be there for you. He can watch over you. He can help you weather those storms. But we have to be someone who holds on. Romans chapter 8 talks about, Paul goes to this long list and talks about, he says, who can separate us from the love of Christ? can sword, or can, kings, or can powers. In the end, his conclusion is, nothing. Nothing can separate us, from the love of Christ. And so, if we're someone who doesn't let go, we know that God's always going to uphold His end of the bargain. He's not going to separate Himself, from us. Now, we can walk away. We can willingly walk away if we choose to. That's a decision that we have to make. God is never going to force you to do something that is against your will. He's not going to save you whether you like it or not. That's not how God operates. But yet He's someone who is motivated by love. He's motivated by a desire to save the ones that He loves. And that is something that we can be forever thankful for. And so if we hold on to God, He's always going to hold on to us. He's never going to let us go, and which is something that's important to keep in mind. But in this case, Jacob, he held on to this man. He would not let him go. He was someone who was determined in this case. And so this man ended up blessing Jacob, and he would eventually even change his name from Jacob to Israel. And if you're familiar with the Old Testament, if you're familiar with the with all the happenings that go on in the Old Covenant, you know that Israel is the name of the people that most of the Old Testament follows. You go through, if you take a look at the book of Exodus, you know that the second book in the Bible, in which describes how a group of people were enslaved in Egypt, but God, He told a man by the name of Moses and his brother Aaron to go and to free these people from that situation. Like I said, a lot of the history of the Old Testament has to do with the nation of Israel, who are the descendants of Jacob. And in the Bible, name changes are always significant. They're always something that mean a lot. The name Jacob means a supplanter or a usurper, one who takes the place of another. While Israel, on the other hand, means one who strives with God, one who kind of competes with God. You're talking about a competition earlier. And so, like I said, we know that the nation of Israel, who are the descendants of Jacob here, would be kind of watched over by God throughout the Old Testament. If you take a look at Deuteronomy chapter 7 and verse 6, it says, in concerning by the nation of Israel, it says, "For you are a people holy to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for His treasured possession, out of all the peoples who are of the face of the earth." We're familiar with that phrase, God's chosen people. That's who Israel was. They were looked after by God. And God gave them a promise that if you are faithful to me, I will look after you, I will bless you, I will protect you, I will do all these things for you. But if you're unfaithful, then these blessings, this protection is going to wipe away, and you're not going to have that. And so most of the history that we have concerns these people, and specifically the struggle that Israel would have with their faithfulness to God. From the time of the Exodus, to the time of the judges, to the time of the kings, to the time of captivity. We know that Israel sometimes struggled mightily with their faithfulness to God, and which means that they lived up to their name, which means means striving with God. And do you ever feel like that? Do you ever feel like someone who at some points in your life are on fire for God? You're extremely faithful. You're doing everything that you can for the kingdom of God, and then other times you find yourselves doing something that is wrong, that is apart from what God has called us to do. Sometimes we emulate the nation of Israel maybe more than we realize. Sometimes we are faithful, sometimes we are not. But they went through this and struggled with this cycle for a very, very long time. And the events when finally when Jesus comes to this earth, when he's going throughout his ministry, he would have some harsh words sometimes for the leadership because of how they were teaching the people and how they had moved away from where they needed to be. And so, but if you ever wonder, if God was surprised that Israel would reject him, or that if he was surprised that Israel would rebel against him, you'll remember what the name Israel means. It means striving, one who strives with God. But yet, God still loved them. He knew that they would rebel. He knew that they would sin. He knew that they would reject him time and time again, but yet he still loved them, which reminds us of his treatment of us. When you take a look at Romans chapter 5 and verse 8, where he says, "But God shows his love for us, and that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us." Paul says in the book of Romans, he says, God didn't look on us and say, well, those people are worthy of my love. Those people have done so much good, I have to save them. Instead, it says that while we were sinners, while we were someone who was embracing a lifestyle of sin, God says, I'm going to send my son, and he's going to die for you. He's going to bring you that salvation. And that's how God shows his love for us, that unconditional love. Jesus was always part of the plan in this case, because God knew that people would sin. He knew that they would reject him sometimes, and that they would not always be faithful. And you think about this, how easy is it to love someone that is not going to return that love to you? How easy is it to love someone who is going to do the opposite of what you want to do, or what you would have them to do? Sometimes it's pretty easy to love those who love us back, to love those who are kind to us, to love those who are compassionate to us. It's a whole lot harder to love those who don't send that back, but who maybe treat us badly, or do things that we don't approve of. It's a lot harder to love those individuals. But yet, that's what God did for us. He looked at us, and he demonstrated his love for us in that case, that he died for us. He was willing to go as far as he did. And what a wonderful thing that is, that God made the decision to do that, because Peter would say in Acts chapter 4, he would say, there's no other name under heaven in which man you can be saved, but the name of Jesus. He provides us something that cannot be found elsewhere. It cannot be given by anything of this earth. Like we said, there's been a lot of great thoughts, great inventions of mankind over the years, but to be free from sin is something that only God can provide. And so it's always a comforting thing to remember just how much God loves us and how dedicated he is to having us to be saved. Like we said, it's not going to happen beyond our own will, beyond what we do ourselves, but he'll be there for you if you come to him. And that's something that is comforting to know. But sometimes there's been sometimes there's been some people who wonder who exactly this individual was in this case. And Jacob would be someone that would kind of go say some pretty important things at the end. He would name this place Peniel, because he says, I've been face to face with God, and I've lived to see it. I have lived through that experience. And we know that he had, and back in Genesis chapter 32, or back in verse 1 of the same chapter, he would have an encounter with some angels as well. And so he was someone who have had these encounters with kind of divine beings before. But he says that this was different. This was a different case. And most likely, this was the encounter that he had with an appearance of Jesus in the Old Testament. In John chapter 1 and verses 1 through 2, we find that The birth of Jesus, was not, when Jesus came into creation, but he is someone who has always been there. In verse 1 it says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And he was in the beginning with God, and all things were made through him. And without him was not anything made that was made." And again in verse 14 it says, "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth." And so we know that Jesus is someone who has always been there, and he has always been part of this process of God, watching over our people. But the last thing that you may look at is that Jacob knew he couldn't rely on his own self-reliance. He couldn't rely on his own power. He had to have this blessing from this individual, in order to be saved. And we have the same thing to look forward to. We can't save ourselves by our own power. We can't save ourselves by our own intellect or our own power ourselves. But we have to have salvation. We have to be someone who comes in and does something that we cannot, who pays that debt of sin, who wipes that slate clean, and like that, the way that Jesus does. He provides so much comfort. He provides so much goodness to us that if we hold on to him, we know that he will always hold on to us, which is such encouragement as we continue to go on throughout this life. And some of the crazy things that life throws at us, we know that we need all the encouragement. We know we need all the comfort that we can get. We hope you have a wonderful day. We appreciate you listening to us today.
If you have a Bible question, would like to receive a free Bible correspondence course, would like a copy of 2 free books, please contact the Nettleton Church of Christ. Speaking the Truth in Love is brought to you by these area churches of Christ. Speaking the Truth in Love can be viewed online at nettletonchurchofchrist.org.